Thanks, Kate. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to part 2, and welcome to all those who have joined us at this UAL week-long of 5 days, 10 years, one planet. It's been an extraordinary week, so thank you to Kate and George and everyone who's been involved in organising it. I'm Professor Becky Early, as Kate said, for those that don't know me, and I'm co-director and co-founder of Centre for Circular Design here at University of the Arts London. Today on the panel we have Cindy Rhodes from Worn Again Technologies, Jade Wilting from Circular Economy Amsterdam, and co-director along with me, Kate Goldsworthy from Centre for Circular Design, and they're all here as founding members of World Circular Textiles Day. And I just want to start by making it really clear that today is not World Circular Textiles Day. You are at a preview session where you're hearing about what will be coming up next month on the 8th of October. And you will all be invited to come and join the launch events happening on that day. So really, this is a sneak peek, and you are the first public audience to find out about this venture. And we really wanted to bring this to you on this last day of this extraordinary week at UAL, because this is about a call to action. It's about bringing together all the key players really in circular textiles, in the textiles industry, to rally, to join efforts to create full circularity by 2050. So we are announcing really that this is a 30-year ambition. It's a plan, it's a roadmap that we've been working on for some time, and you're going to hear a lot more about this from Cindy and from Jade and from Kate in just a little bit. But I think ending this week, which has been about ideas and demands and passion and a sense of urgency and a call to arms for change, this session is about how we're responding to that, how we're bringing people together to propose real change, a roadmap, scientifically informed, social and technological and industry change. You might wonder why we've got a mountain in all of our social media and on this slide here, and it's about moving mountains, because to achieve full circularity by 2050, there's a lot of work to do, and it really is quite phenomenal what needs to be achieved. But at the same time, in a very short space of time, we have brought together an extraordinary portfolio of founding signatories. I actually thought I knew everybody in this sector, but it's been an incredible process to see all the different companies, R&D companies, NGOs, of course brands, and individuals who are dedicating their career to creating a circular, renewable industry, a total transformation of a polluting industry. So I'm going to hand over to the panel to introduce themselves, and from there we'll then go into some questions which I have prepared, and then there is a session of questions at the end which we hope we'll be drawing from you. So I just want to make sure that you're aware of the chat bar and how to use the chat bar, and we're going to be inviting you to put comments and chats in that chat bar as we go through this session. So if you look on the bottom right hand side of your screen, you should see a small band, a little purple tab if it's not opened up on the bottom right, a small band and an icon with a speech bubble. So just, and Kate's waving there from the chat bar. Make sure you know where that is, and please do get going with some questions as this session unfolds. So yeah, it gives me great pleasure to hand over now to each of the panelists who have prepared a really short presentation to introduce their angle, their perspective, and in a sense which mountain it is that they're concerned with. So first, Cindy Rhodes, Worn Again Technologies. Over to you.
Agree. Let me see here. Is my camera working? Here we go. There we go. Can you see and hear me now?
Yep, got you.
We can, yep.
Okay, great, great. Thank you very much for that, Becky. It's great to see or know you're all out there today on a really exciting occasion. Thanks for organizing this session. It really is a test run, so it will be great to hear what people's thoughts are, feedback, questions, ideas, and hopefully you'll all get involved. So just starting out here, this is a bit of a doom and gloom slide, but the good news about starting out with that is it means we can then go on to talk about solutions, which is the exciting. But I think this slide for me really brings it home. And it's all about resources. Circularity is all about resources and managing them better. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, you're coming in and out.
Okay, Becky?
Yeah, I suggest you actually turn your camera off,
Oh.
Cindy, and then we might hear you uninterrupted.
I'll do that. Yeah. Okay, I'll give that a try. So yeah, just starting out here, circularity being all about resources and how we manage them. At the moment on the left here, we've got the pile of textiles made using polyester and cotton every year. Thank you, George. It's an extraordinary amount of raw materials that go into making textiles. This is an old number in 2015. I'm sure there's more recent ones, but it's expansive. And the challenge is, and what we know is that in the next 10 years, the demand for polyester and cotton, the highest used fibers in the industry, is set to increase by 63%, which is huge. That means vast amounts of energy, land use, pesticides, all sorts of things to make cotton and polyester, which we're going to struggle with in the coming years. Now, at the same time that we're putting all of these resource constraints on the planet, we're throwing away almost as much as we're making every year with that third column there, with around 53 million tons of post-consumer and post-industrial textile waste going to landfill every year. I mean, it's absolutely ludicrous. And then I think it's summed up by the number at the tiny little 1% there, which shows that out of all of this, less than 1% of end-of-use textiles are going back into making new textiles. So we have this crazy system where we're making so much and we're not able to recycle any of it. And that's really the reason for our existence as a company. We realized that the challenges today with recycling textiles are mainly economic and technical. The solutions for being able to turn old textiles back into new textiles are limited. And that's where we come in with our technology.
Lost you again.
Oh dear, sorry about my connection here. How's that?
Yeah, you're coming and going. Just bear that in mind.
Oh dear, sorry about that. Yeah, just a quick overview. So back in 2012, we started the development of a technology that could take in end-of-use textiles, which are non-rewearable, not suitable for reuse, and they can go through a process. They can be made from polyester and or cotton. They go through a process where they're broken down. The raw materials are separated, decontaminated, and extracted to become new, to go back into fiber spinning for both polyester and cellulose. And so ultimately, a circularity solution to turn old textiles back into new textiles. That's all from me, Becky.
Yeah, thank you, Cindy. Great intro and great context, because you are the real founding member here in terms of it's been your idea to set up this World Circular Textiles Day. And of course, you are a long-term pioneer of processes and technologies for circular textiles, and we'll find out a bit more during the Q&A. If I could now hand over to Jade Wilting from Circular Economy to talk about her mountain.
Yes, hi, thanks so much, Becky. I'm Jade Wilting from Circular Economy, and as Cindy has already mentioned, it is all about resources, and at Circular Economy, we indeed deal with a similar mountain. And when you talk about these resources and circularity, it's really important to start reimagining who these resource providers are and who the resource owners are. And so in a circular economy, you could imagine that the new resource providers are actually consumers. So if we're all wearing clothing for a certain amount of time, what happens after we've worn that clothing? And if we are returning them to brands, then surely brands can be the owners of these resources. And so if you were to imagine all of the textile problems as a big mountain, you can think that there is work to be done on two sides of the mountain. On the left side, beating the mountain. So that's all about building the data, the infrastructure, and the technology that's needed to valorize textile waste. So it's really important to scale technologies that are out there so that we can process this massive growing mountain. And on the right side, you see prevent the mountain. So that's all about how can we prevent the mountain from getting any bigger than it is currently. And that's all about building capacity in industry and education to assess and adopt circular strategies. So it's really important that we're working on both sides of this mountain and how we can use the resources that we already have for as long as possible. And the reason why we've joined the World Circular Textiles Day, and Becky, maybe you can go, oh, can I go to the next slide? Yes, I can. Is throughout the years that's the circular economy has been used in the industry and in the sector, we've seen a range of different commitments coming in, and I'm sure you're all familiar with the global fashion agenda and some of the commitments that came out of that in 2017, and that was really fantastic to see. And here we saw a lot of brands commit to 4 goals, but that was for 2020. And as you can see, a lot of these, well, for example, the one next to that, the Fashion for Climate Action, that's being started by the United Nations. Then we see the Fashion Pact started by France. We know that EMF has got the jeans redesign, and the most recent addition to the group is the Fashion Conveners. And so through all of this, we noticed that a lot of brands and industry organizations are creating goals for the next few years, and what we're really interested in is how we're going to get to full circularity by 2050. And so what we're hoping to do with the World Circular Textiles Day is create a roadmap that makes all of this from high level to the most detailed very visible and clear, so that we can make sure that we achieve that.
Thank you, Jade.
Sure.
Moving on to Dr. Kate Goldsworthy.
Hi, sorry, just a bit of a delay turning on my mic. So my mountain is it looks more of a gentle slope, but it's every textile that's been produced since we first began making fibers, and really it's just to try and understand where we are now in terms of innovation and fiber types. And it's incredible when you think that until about halfway up this slope, just at the beginning of the steep part in the 1900s, we had only 5 fibers in use. There were no man-made fibers. All of those have happened in the last just over the last 100 years. And it's really incredible to think the positive impacts that they've had, as well as negative, on the world in terms of innovation, technology advancement, from everything from medical improvements through to communications and transport, as well as clothes and the stuff around us. And I think it's really sort of incredible when you zoom forward to today at the end of this slide on the right, and see the complete dominance of man-made, and in particular oil-based textile fibres today. They are well over half of the fibre picture globally, and also, you know, with cotton represent almost 90% of that picture. And those are the two fibres that the technology being piloted by Worn Again can deal with. So just think about the impact of being able to recollect, valorize 90% of everything we use in the future. That's not to say there's not still space for incredible sort of innovation in the other 10%, and environmental improvements across 100%. But we really do need to tackle this problem. Otherwise, you know, there is no circularity, and what we're doing is simply kicking the can down the road a little bit further. So, you know, the call to action really for me is that polyester is so essential to our lives. We need to better value it and appreciate the millions of years it took to create. And I think I just want to zoom forward now to 2050 and give a vision of a world when polyester is no longer even referred to as a non-renewable. If Worn Again's technology sort of comes to fruition in the next few years, then all of a sudden that turns this massive non-renewable resource into a renewable one. And I think that's the sort of the vision that I would really like to see happening long before 2050.
Thank you, Kate, very much. Thanks to all the panel. I'm just going to flash this up, which is the 8th of October, which is when World Circular Textile Day is going to happen. And then I'm going to ask the panelists to come back in. So if George could take the slide down, and we could have people, and maybe Cindy, maybe don't do your camera. Cindy's on a barge on a canal in a remote part, which is why we're not letting her put her camera on. But hopefully you should be able to see myself and Kate and Jade. So I've got a few questions lined up, and then we're going to throw the floor open. And I would like to start with Cindy, actually. I'd like you to tell us when and what is happening on World Circular Textiles Day, and how people can join in.
Sure. Okay, so, well, I'll start with what World Circular Textiles Day is, what it's about. And I think firstly, it's a day to celebrate the growing community of companies, organizations, and individuals who are all actively working towards a circular future, and to really get these messages out there. Secondly, it's about imagining what full circularity could look like if we actually achieved it. And so we have a vision that Circular 2050 will be a time when there's dignity, equity, and equality for those working in the industry, and a time when all textile resources in the form of products and raw materials are kept in continual circulation. So the short version of that is no virgin resources being used by 2050. And so as part of World Circular Textiles Day, we're launching a website which will provide a framework for a collaborative roadmap. So roadmap to be developed by the industry and individuals, which is revised over the next 30 years. So until the vision is actually achieved. And the aim of this website will be for it to become a living and breathing time capsule that captures the progress, it charts the momentum of circularity and how we get there over the next 30 years.
I realise you've had to condense and boil down, you know, months and months, years and years of your thinking into that answer there. And we have been talking about this for some time. And why is it that you think creating a single day that happens every year for the next 30 years is a good way for us to be tackling the mountain? What's it going to do?
Yeah, well, I think that hopefully it's going to be more than just one day a year, but it gives us a focal point, which is really important. And I think, I mean, it was really after COVID hit, a lot of us were concerned about um, what it would mean for circularity and the challenge of textile waste. We were having a lot of discussions about what was happening, joining webinars, talking about how bad the problems were. And we realized that there was a need for a more positive outlook. And that was where the idea came from. The idea of imagining what it could look like. Once we know what it looks like, we can start working backwards and focus on the stepping stones for getting there as an industry. So, once you know where you want to get to, it's much easier to plan the journey. And so we've come up with this concept of full circularity by 2050, but telling the story retrospectively in three distinct phases. So first is the R&D and the innovation years. That's from 2010 to 2025, and we're right in the middle of that right now. So we have all the puzzle pieces for forming the system, but we're still figuring out how to put it all together. The next comes the infrastructure and the rollout years, which is 2025 to 2040. And that's when we've got the model for the system with the collection systems feeding into reuse and regenerative recycling, designing for circularity, digital platforms that with product platforms, all the components of circularity in a model, but we just need to then replicate that and roll that out. And then the third phase is the expansion in the completion years, 2040 to 2050. And this is when we have all of the systems in place. They've been rolled out, but we really need to just increase the capacity to eradicate the use of virgin resources altogether. So then 2050, we're there when we're going to have a big party. But the future, this future, it's yet to take shape. This is a starting point. And I think collectively, all of the founders of WCTD, we have an idea of what these three phases might look like, but we don't have the answers. And so this is about an invitation to say, get involved, help shape the roadmap, deliver the vision. And that's what the website will be about.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. It's so powerful, important to put future visions in place. I know that a lot of people are trying to embrace circularity, trying to move, linear models, linear systems into circular ones, and they're beginning to realize just how difficult that is and how much time it's going to take. And there is a lack of a vision and a kind of clarity about what the end goal is, or where we are all trying to sort of, in a way, interconnect to come together to this sort of shared vision of the future, and how we might be able to have fashion and textiles in the future that do flow in these constant loops. So there's a power behind this idea to create this shared vision and then retro engineer. But I'm going to come to Jade now, because it's been quite astonishing to see the founding signatories flood in. I mean, we had a period of time where we were just approaching everybody in our address book saying, do you want to join this? Because we think this is going to be a real sort of cornerstone movement for achieving circularity. And it's been extraordinary how many people have come back and what they've been saying. So Jade, could you tell us a bit more about some of the comments and ideas and sort of general response really from industry?
Sure, absolutely. It is exciting to see such a range of not only brands wanting to join, but innovators and circular soldiers and industry organizations joining. And I think what is getting them excited for this is that it's a collaborative and joint effort towards circularity that I think anyone is able to contribute towards. And that's really the main message, that anyone can and should contribute towards this collective vision. And I think the people joining all have that same ambition, which is we want circularity by 2050. And I think that kind of collective vision is what's really catapulting this initiative in the way that it is, that it's just grown so quickly, I think, and that's also largely due to to Cindy and the work that she's been doing over the past few years. But it's been really great to see the really good feedback. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Jade. It has. It's I think people really felt that yes, they needed a vision, but also they needed a sense of collaboration, an idea, a roadmap, a kind of actually to draw energy from each other to pursue something connected, because we have been seeing lots of different innovations coming through from technology, from sort of strategy, from design, but sort of not really joining up. And this is something that Kate and I have been thinking about and working on quite a bit. So Kate, I'm going to throw you a wildcard question, really, although it does relate to the one I set you. But I'd like you to, or I'd like to invite you to talk about our sort of and our interconnected vision for circular textiles, and then how you see this working here for World Circular Textiles Day.
Great. Well, I think really we've started to touch on, the most important thing about this to me, which is this idea of shared vision. And I think, one of the real challenges of sustainability in general has been, some of the often tensions between different solutions and how they might fit together. And the thing I remember being so excited about with circularity, when I first came across the concept, was this idea that it gave a vision that everyone could pull together in the same direction. Now, obviously, it's turned out to be slightly more complex than that, but I do think that potential is still there. And I think, we have to understand with circularity that it's not purely about the sort of the virgin recovery of resources, but without that it doesn't exist. Without that, it is purely an extension or a sort of pushing things into the future. But once we've got that, once it's possible, then all of the other things that we feel, intuitively are the right thing to do, making things better quality, finding new ways to share resources, to reinvent, to remanufacture, to retain value, all become equally important. But what we need to do is to not allow anything to be building that mountain. We need to start, making the mountain kind of regenerate itself on a future basis. And one of the really interesting things we did right at the start with Worn Again was to look at how much potential feedstock there was already in existence. And we quickly realized that if we were never to create a new material from virgin materials again, there's enough if we can sort of pull these things together. So I think that's the and in a way, and I think the other exciting thing about what Cindy's proposing in terms of this living and breathing time capsule is it gives us a kind of a barometer or a way to know where we are. And that's exciting to me, because I think, in our world of academia, things get committed to paper and are fixed quite often. And this is, one of those areas that is just transforming so rapidly. I think this is a brilliant way to, to keep a handle on that process.
Thank you, Kate. Great answer. I'm now going to throw it open to the audience. Actually, I had one more question, which was about sort of specifics about getting involved, but there's already some cracking questions that have come in. And I'm going to start with one which actually came in via Instagram, because there's huge concern amongst this generation, this next generation, about greenwashing and about whether circularity is a kind of get out card, really, for companies, that they make a recycled product, they kind of give it a lot of marketing spin, but actually the fundamental linear volume model of the company doesn't change. How do we align incremental progress and sort of development with this 30-year ambition, how are we going to avoid letting companies greenwash and actually make it a genuine movement? Jade, do you want to come in on that? You're nodding. It's your mistake, the nod.
I think the word accountability, well, that's what springs to my mind firstly. I think it's interesting that the question has come from Instagram, because I think we've seen such a huge change in the role that social media can play in accountability. And I think what will start happening in the next few years, and we already see it happening, is that there is a much quicker kind of contact line between consumers and brands, and that is Twitter, so Instagram. You know, there's so many channels now, and so I think, you know, greenwashing, it happens, unfortunately, but I think the vigilance is increasing, consumer vigilance. I think also consumer ballsiness is increasing, just to kind of, you know, contact the brand and say, I'm curious as to what your supply chain is, or, you know, what are your renewable materials, or do you have any preferred fibers, where can I find that information? And it's great to see that there's an increase in how consumers are interacting with brands. On the other side, I think also there is a huge part to be played for policy on imposing incentives towards brands to really integrate circular practices beyond marketing and communications. So think about incorporating recycled textiles, you know, and then you could look at policy that it gives brands tax breaks, for instance, so that they're incentivized to incorporate recycled textiles. France has got a fantastic policy that encourages this, for example. And so I think each kind of actor has got its role to play. I think policy is a really important role. I think consumers have a really important role to play in preventing greenwashing, and, you know, peers, so other brands. I think that's a discussion that I think could possibly happen more often, in a pre-competitive way, of course. But I believe that we're moving towards more transparency, and I hope that we can hold each other more accountable, especially with, you know, an open document, an open living roadmap.
Great, Jade, thank you. So user pressure, policy, transparency, and then inside the company, what happens then, building on this question, what happens when a company wants to transform? How do they start? This is how they start, right? With one product, and then it evolves. I mean, Kate, Cindy, do you want to just sort of complete the answers around that question?
Do you want to start, Cindy, or I can?
Yeah, I'm happy. Yeah, I'm happy to go. I think Jade summed up a lot of the dynamics, which are really important and evolving and changing. And I think that transparency issue, I think we're moving into a time now where I don't, it's hard to greenwash these days without getting busted. And I think we've evolved from that, where, I mean, in our experience, so many of the brands and the retailers now are actively engaged in transformation and change, but they have massive supply chains. You know, they're global. There's a heck of a lot of work that needs to be done. But in our experience, you know, we've witnessed real commitment internally, by different teams at, you know, many different companies wanting to actually shift the you know, the bar on these issues. So I'm less worried about greenwash. I'm more worried about how can we really accelerate this change, because I haven't met that many people that aren't interested in making it happen. As you were saying, Becky, we're involved in linear supply chains. We're talking about creating it's a new system. It's a new way of doing things, and there are a lot of tweaks that need to happen to make it work, and that's what everyone's focused on with circularity. So I think even the very nature of circularity can get us away from all that hidden stuff. You know, everything's going to be transparent, because brands need to know where their raw materials came from, where it was produced. Consumers are asking for it. I think it's, you know, the social media side of it. I think it's moving in the right direction. The question is, how do we make it happen quicker?
I couldn't agree with you more, Cindy. I'm optimistic about, in a way, the role of industry in this as an equal partner. And I think, you know, Becky and I have seen so much kind of positive energy from the people we've engaged with in industry over the years who really want to find a solution, if only it was there within reach. And I think as well, this sort of idea of transparency and the technology in that area is such an interesting space, because, as you say, there's getting less and less places for people to hide in the supply chain, and transparency is becoming, or, you know, perhaps the invisibility problem of not being able to see far enough in your supply chain is starting to get better with a lot of the companies that we were talking about in our session on Monday. But also, I think that the social media side of things is a double-edged sword, in that, you know, it provides on one hand this incredible platform for activism and marketing. I mean, just look at the success of Fashion Revolution, which is effectively, you know, a marketing campaign that has brought voices together from all over the world. But it's also something that's fed fast fashion. You know, it's also something that's sort of used by the same generation to sort of be more engaged in fast fashion. So I think it's more about sort of intent than you know, one type of technology or another being more green. So it's, you know, how do we really harness that marketing brilliance, the circularity?
Yeah, exactly what I was going to say. This is an effort in harnessing, isn't it? It's all the technology, all of the opportunities, all of the networks, all that are there, and building towards a real vision that's been co-created and that has you know, people committed and signed up to it. Now, I've got some specific questions I want you to think about. One person would really like to know about the future of leather. Does leather come into this picture? What's going to be happening with leather in the future? Can we recycle it? Is it a material flow that we're accounting for? Cindy, that's one for you.
And I'll follow up briefly.
Sorry, I was just reading Kira's question and going to answer that. What was, I thought the question
leather.
about leather.
Let's start about leather.
Yeah. You start with leather.
It's a problem in so many ways, but all I really wanted to say about leather is it's a bit like denim in that it has its own industry around it, and obviously, you know, the environmental issues around and societal issues around the production of leather and the finishing of it are huge. In terms of circularity, I think there are some really interesting companies regenerating leather, sort of in a mechanical way for the short term, but there's also just starting to be some fascinating research around the regeneration of protein fibers. I think, you know, cellulosics and synthetics have been developing for decades now, but there's some fascinating work around regenerating protein fibers, so hair and skin products, that I think could provide some real innovation in the future.
Yeah, it's a really, really broad materials palette out there when you look through the lens of circularity and the challenges that lie ahead. Cindy, actually, everybody, how does the second-hand market fit into this vision of total circularity by 2050?
I can kick off on that. I mean, our vision of circularity, it's about keeping products as products for as long as possible. And then when they can no longer be used as products, we break them down to recapture the raw materials. So circularity is 100%, well, partially about reuse. There's so many different facets of that, but it opens up a whole new world for all the reuse platforms, the rental, the leasing. You know, that should be the #1 goal, is products as products for as long as possible. So I think that whole space has really blossomed in the last couple of years. Jade, Kate, you may have some better examples of highlighting some of those names, and I'm sure people on the webinar will know of many of them. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of top of the tier when it comes to circularity. And then once those products can no longer be reused, we can recapture those resources. And I love, Kate, your spin on polyester. It's always had such a negative connotation, but looking at it as a regenerative, it's a renewable resource is just brilliant, because we put all of this energy into drilling for oil, mining for it, and pulling it out of the ground. The worst thing we could do is throw it away and not reuse it again. We do have the challenge of microfibers, so we need to overcome that and prevent those from ending up in rivers and oceans. But I think, you know, there's a lot of technology and innovation happening around that. So if we can tackle that, that would be good too.
Thank you, Cindy.
I went off the reuse, but maybe Jade, you have some thoughts.
All textiles have fibrillation into water systems problems, not just polyester, as we're learning in our other research areas at the moment. There's a great question about the global north and south, which I think is incredibly important. You know, how, for our vision, how does this balance out? Because, you know, we're in the fast-paced, developed West. What about the global south, and how does this align? How do the speeds and how do the traditions and how do the industries, how do they align in our vision of 2050? Jade, let's bring you back in, because we had some interesting conversations in the lead up to this.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you brought that up, and I'm also looking at some of Dastan Satoshi's question. I hope I pronounced your name right. It's so important in this conversation to take account of the various contexts where circularity happens, and I think we need to be so careful that it becomes, or that it stays a kind of a Northern European rhetoric, and that people feel excluded from circularity. I think inclusivity is absolutely as important as keeping resources in use for as long as possible. And so, just directly looking at the question that Dastan posted, like, what about the whitewashing that's happening, for instance? That's a really difficult question. I mean, because, well, it's like, how do you answer that? Because on the one hand, I think you could argue that it's creating awareness. That if someone has a platform to stand on to educate, then I believe they should be using it irrespective of their race. I think what is very important is acknowledging that circularity doesn't necessarily have the exact same name in different countries. For example, in South Africa, where I'm from, we deal with waste very differently. And now I live in Amsterdam, and I see how people throw out perfectly good furniture once a week because that's the time when the municipality collects local waste. So if anything, I think cultural sensitivity is really important in making this a kind of successful and inclusive initiative. And I would just say yeah, let me just keep it at that. I think inclusivity and
brilliant. Thank you, Jade. Thank you, Jade. Absolutely, which is exactly why we're making it a time capsule project. We're making it open source. We're inviting anybody to get involved. So we're going to round off shortly with how people can get involved, and Gabby's question in particular about how students might get involved, and the next generation of young designers who are really passionate and interested in circularity. But I've got time to squeeze in one more question, which I think is fascinating, because it's about, could we ever see in this year 2050 that the fashion industry is promoting emotional and psychological fashionability to people rather than fashionability through products? Can we actually move into the next dimension and see the fashion industry producing mental well-being and a positive sense of self through means other than products? Tough one for you guys, because you're less maybe aware of those kinds of approaches, but really I think we're talking about the service industry. We're talking about the opportunity for circular fashion and textiles to come to us in other forms. Any thoughts?
This is your question, really, Becky.
Why don't you start?
I'll put it right back at you at the end. I think
we'll do more. Go on.
I was just going to say, that's a really kind of classic circularity approach, in a way that by almost dematerializing a product or a need, then we can avoid some of these issues in the first place. And I think when we're talking about, for example, the sharing economy or peer-to-peer lending or the service economy. It's not purely about clothing. You know, the textile industry is so broad, and there are industries where this is already really working. And I think it's also, you know, with this sort of latest, more connected generation, I think it is starting to work in clothing in a way that was never possible before. So
Yeah.
I see it as central to circularity and part of the mix. But I know it's an area you've done a lot of work in yourself, Becky.
But I just think it's really important that we're drawing this in now to this situation, because to move from a linear to a circular economy will be expensive. And the reason we have highly optimized linear systems that stem from the Industrial Revolution is they make money. And, you know, virgin resources are currently, on the whole, cheaper than recycled or regenerated resources. So we're going to need everything to kind of plug into the industry to you know, achieve global industrial wealth, but within the boundaries, you know, whether that's donor economics or whether that's the planetary boundaries, however you want to sort of identify it. But so the service industry, the non-resource based offers that joyful fashion can give people are an incredibly important part of this vision for me. Absolutely, Kate. They are brilliant questions. I've been working really, really hard to try and answer all of them as we go along. The last one I'd like to sort of draw attention to is, should we be talking about greenwashing in academia? I think we should note that we should be, and I think that maybe we should be also having an element of that discussed in World Circular Textiles Day and our roadmap vision for the future. But I'm just going to end now. I'm going to throw the floor back to Cindy for one final word about how can people get involved. And actually, George, if you wouldn't mind putting up the final slide so that people can just take down the email address. But Cindy, how can people get involved? What's going to be happening on the 8th of October? You know, what can people start thinking about building into their project work, their final collections? Thanks, George.
Can you, yeah, are we still on? Yeah, good. Well, I hope the website will be ready by then. It's currently under development, but we will have an email address, mail@worldcirculartextilesday.com. You will be able to become a signatory supporting it, and there will be information about all the other organizations and companies working in this space, but also there will be an opportunity to start contributing to that roadmap. And I think just one last thing to say about, and we talk about this need to accelerate and move this quickly. I think the idea of the roadmap is that it will help build out the conversation around what's possible today and other things that are on the horizon that may take a bit more time. So on the one hand, we need acceleration, but we're also going to need patience for all of this to come together, for technologies to get to market, for all of it to work. But if we can start the conversation, if we can visualize it in one place, and we can have it open as a platform for contribution from designers, from everyone around the, you know, kind of circularity supply and return loop. I think that's the goal of this. So www.worldcirculartextilesday.com. Check it out on October 8th and do sign up.
Cindy, thank you. Yeah, and you know, Gabby, other educators, we would very much like to hear from you about your ideas about how the students that you know really well could get involved and what they might do if they're particularly taken by this vision. I think that's all for now. I think we're going to have to sign off, and I'd just like to thank everybody for setting it up and taking part. Thank you so much for the brilliant questions, and I really hope to see you again on the 8th of October. So goodbye all.
Brilliant. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you so much, Becky, Kate, Jade, and Cindy. Thanks so much for that, and good luck in preparation for the 8th of October. We will see you there. Those of you who've been on this in this session, you might be interested in the next session as well, which is starting in just a few minutes. It's Fashion Futures 2030 with Professor Dilys Williams and Anna Fitzpatrick from the Centre for Sustainable Fashion, one of our other research centres, which is based at London College of Fashion. All the videos, presentations will be available next week through the network newsletter, and we'll put the link to that here and in the next session too. So Arushi and everyone else, you'll be able to catch up on this talk. But for now, thanks so much again for the Centre for Circular Design and your excellent guests.